The morning dust still hung in the air when Josephine Ashford drove her wagon into Carson City, Nevada, and heard the first man laugh at her ambitions. It was July of 1877, and the sun beat down mercilessly on her broad shoulders as she climbed down from the driver's seat, her sturdy frame causing the wagon to shift slightly with her weight. She had come west with nothing but determination, her late father's small inheritance, and a dream that everyone told her was impossible. "You hear what the lady wants," a grizzled man outside the general store called to his companions. "She aims to buy the Fletcher property and raise horses." The laughter rippled through the small crowd that had gathered. Josephine kept her chin high, her dark curls escaping from beneath her worn hat. She was 24 years old, and she had heard variations of this mockery her entire life. Back in Missouri, they had laughed when she said she could ride better than her brothers. They had laughed when she said she could rope a steer. They had laughed when she said she was heading west to start her own ranch. She was used to being underestimated because of her size. Her curves were generous, her hips wide, her arms thick with muscle that most people mistook for simple fat. But Josephine knew her own strength, knew what her body could do when pushed to its limits. The Fletcher place. Another man spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "That property's got the meanest herd of wild horses this side of the Sierras. Been running free for near about 3 years since old Fletcher passed. His sons tried to break them, gave up after 2 months, sold the land cheap, because nobody wants to deal with those devils." Josephine turned to face them fully, her hazel eyes steady. "That is precisely why I want it. The price is right, and I know horses." "Lady, those are not horses. Those are lightning and fury with hooves. The lead mare, she is something wicked. Black as midnight with a white star on her forehead, and she has kicked more men than I can count. They say no woman could ever break that wild herd. Then I suppose I will be the first." Josephine adjusted her skirts and walked toward the land office, ignoring the continued laughter behind her. The transaction took less than an hour. The land agent seemed almost guilty taking her money, warning her 3 separate times about the wild herd that came with the property. But Josephine signed the papers with a steady hand, and by noon, she owned 200 acres of Nevada scrubland, a dilapidated ranch house, and a herd of horses that no man had been able to tame. She spent the first week alone on her property, repairing the worst of the damage to the house and outbuildings. The roof had holes that let in the blazing sun, the corral fences were broken in a dozen places, and the well needed cleaning. But Josephine had not come west expecting luxury. She had come expecting work, and work was something she had never been afraid of. It was on the 8th day that she first saw them. She had risen before dawn, as was her habit, and walked out to the eastern pasture with her coffee. The sun was just beginning to paint the sky in shades of rose and gold when they appeared on the ridge like spirits materializing from the morning mist. There were perhaps 40 of them, ranging from sleek yearlings to battle-scarred stallions. But it was the lead mare that captured Josephine's attention completely. The other men had described her accurately. She was black as a starless night, with a perfect white star marking her forehead. But they had not captured her beauty, the way she moved with fluid grace, the intelligence that shone in her dark eyes as she surveyed the ranch below. The mare looked directly at Josephine, and for a long moment, they simply stared at each other across the distance. Then the mare tossed her head, wheeled around, and led her herd back over the ridge in a thunder of hooves. "I will earn your trust," Josephine whispered to the empty air. "However long it takes." She began that very day. Instead of trying to drive the herd into the broken corrals as the men before her had done, Josephine took a different approach. She repaired one section of fence, making it strong and solid, then left the gate wide open. Inside the corral, she placed fresh water and the best hay she could afford. The horses ignored it for 3 days. On the 4th day, Josephine woke to find that some of the hay had been disturbed. She smiled and refilled the supply, then went about her other work. Each day, she left the gate open and the offerings inside. Each day, more of the hay and water was consumed. But the horses never came while she watched. They were too wary, too wild. It was during the 2nd week that the cowboy appeared. Josephine was working on reinforcing another section of fence, her muscles straining as she drove a post into the hard, packed earth, when she heard the sound of hooves approaching. She straightened, wiping sweat from her brow, and saw a rider coming up the path to her ranch. He sat tall in the saddle, his hat pulled low against the afternoon sun. As he drew closer, Josephine could make out more details. He was young, perhaps 26 or 27, with a lean build that spoke of years in the saddle. His shirt was dusty from travel, and a bandana hung loose around his neck. When he was close enough, he dismounted with the easy grace of someone who had spent more time on horseback than on foot. He removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair and gray eyes that were studying her with undisguised curiosity. "Madam," he said, his voice a low drawl that carried the hint of Texas in its vowels. "Name is Samuel Hayes. I heard in town that someone had bought the Fletcher place. Came to see if you might need help with those wild horses." Josephine leaned on her post driver, assessing him. He was looking at her without the mockery she had seen in the eyes of the men in town. There was respect in his gaze and something else, a wariness, as if he expected her to dismiss him. "You have experience with wild horses, Mr. Hayes." "Yes, madam. Spent 3 years in Montana working with mustangs. Before that, I was breaking horses for the cavalry down in Texas." He glanced toward the eastern ridge where the herd often appeared. "Heard about this particular bunch." "Heard they are the hardest horses in Nevada to handle." "They are wild, not hard," Josephine corrected. "There is a difference. Hard implies they are obstinate or mean. They are simply free and unused to trusting humans." Something shifted in Samuel's expression, a softening around his eyes. "That is a wise way of looking at it. Can you respect that way of looking at it? Because I will not have anyone working my land who thinks the solution is to break their spirit with force." Samuel turned his hat in his hands, considering. "Madam, I have seen men try to break horses with violence. It does not work, not really. You might get a horse that will obey out of fear, but you will never get a true partner that way. If you are looking to gentle these horses proper-like, with patience and respect, then I am your man. If you are looking for something else, I will ride on." Josephine studied him for another long moment. She had not planned on hiring help, had not budgeted for it. But there was something about Samuel Hayes that made her reconsider. Perhaps it was the honest way he met her eyes. Perhaps it was the fact that he had not once looked at her with judgment for her size or her gender. "I cannot pay much," she said finally. "Room and board and a small wage. The bunkhouse needs work, but it is serviceable." "That is more than fair, madam. My name is Josephine Ashford." "You can call me Josephine. Then you should call me Samuel." He settled his hat back on his head and smiled, and Josephine felt something warm unfurl in her chest. It was a good smile, genuine and reaching his eyes. Over the following days, Josephine discovered that hiring Samuel had been one of the best decisions she could have made. He was tireless in his work, up before dawn and often laboring until well past sunset. Together, they repaired the rest of the corral, reinforced the barn, and established a routine for enticing the wild herd. Samuel watched Josephine work with undisguised admiration. She was stronger than most men he had known, capable of lifting fence posts that would make others struggle. She worked with an efficiency born of necessity, never wasting motion or energy. And when it came to the horses, she had an intuition that he had rarely seen. "You have a gift," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple. "The way you think about the horses, anticipate what they need." Josephine felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the day's labor. "My father raised horses back in Missouri. I grew up in the stables. He used to say that if you want to understand a horse, you have to think like a horse. Wise man. He was. He died 2 years ago. Fever took him sudden." She stared out at the darkening landscape. "Before he passed, he made me promise I would not let anyone tell me what I could or could not do. Said I had more horse sense in my little finger than most men had in their whole bodies." Samuel turned to look at her profile, at the determined set of her jaw and the strength in her bearing. He was right about that too. Something in his tone made Josephine glance over at him. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted between them. It was subtle, like the first hint of dawn on the horizon, but it was there, a recognition, a possibility. Josephine looked away first, suddenly nervous in a way she had not been since arriving in Nevada. "We should get some sleep. Want to try something new tomorrow with the herd." "What are you thinking?" "I think it is time I went to them, instead of waiting for them to come to us." Samuel's eyebrows rose. "That is risky. If they spook, they might not come back to the ranch for weeks. Or they might start to see me as part of their landscape, not a threat to run from." Josephine stood, brushing dust from her skirts. "Trust me on this." "I do," Samuel said simply, and the conviction in those 2 words made Josephine's heart skip. The next morning, Josephine packed a small bag with some hard bread, dried meat, and her canteen. She saddled her own horse, a patient gelding named Copper that she had brought from Missouri, and rode out toward the eastern ridge. Samuel watched her go, fighting the urge to follow. She had asked him to stay back, to let her do this alone, and he respected that. But every protective instinct he possessed wanted to accompany her, to make sure she was safe. He had not expected to feel this way when he rode onto the Fletcher property. He had heard about the wild herd and had been intrigued by the challenge. But when he saw Josephine, saw her strength and her determination and the kindness in her eyes, something had awakened in him. Something he had thought long dormant. Samuel had loved once before, back in Texas. Her name had been Rebecca, and she had been small and delicate and beautiful in the way that society deemed proper. They had been engaged, planning a summer wedding, when she had broken things off. She told him she could not marry a man who worked with horses all day, who came home smelling of sweat and animals, who had no ambitions beyond the next fence line. It had hurt more than Samuel cared to admit. He had left Texas shortly after, drifted north through Colorado and Wyoming, taking work where he could find it. He had told himself he was done with romance, that his life would be horses and work and nothing more. But watching Josephine ride out toward that wild herd, her back straight and her bearing confident, Samuel felt the walls he had built around his heart begin to crack. Josephine found the herd grazing in a small valley beyond the ridge. She stopped Copper a good 100 yards away and simply sat, not moving, barely breathing. The horses had noticed her immediately. Several heads came up, ears pricked forward. The black lead mare stood at the edge of the herd, staring directly at Josephine with those intelligent dark eyes. For an hour, Josephine did nothing but sit. Her legs grew stiff, her back began to ache, but she remained motionless. She was part of the landscape, as unthreatening as a tree or a rock. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, several of the younger horses went back to grazing. The lead mare still watched, still wary, but she did not call the herd to run. Josephine waited another 30 minutes, then slowly, carefully, she dismounted. She tied Copper to a scrub brush and walked a few steps forward before sitting down in the dust. Then she pulled out her bread and began to eat, as calm and natural as if she were having a picnic. The horses watched her. The morning wore on, growing hotter. Josephine finished her bread, drank some water, and simply waited. She was good at waiting. Patience was something she had learned early, working with her father's horses. It was nearly noon when one of the yearlings, a curious bay with a white blaze, took a step toward her. Then another. The lead mare made a soft sound, not quite a warning, but the yearling ignored her. It was young enough to be brave, old enough to be independent. Josephine did not move as the yearling approached. It came within 20 feet, stretching its neck out, nostrils flaring as it caught her scent. Josephine continued to sit still, her hands loose in her lap, her breathing slow and steady. The yearling took another step, then another. It was close enough now that Josephine could have reached out and touched it, but she did not. She simply let it explore, let it make the choice to approach her. The young horse sniffed at her hat at her shoulder. Its whiskers tickled her neck. Josephine felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them away. This was trust, tentative and fragile, but real. After a few minutes, the yearling stepped back, apparently satisfied. It returned to the herd, and Josephine saw the lead mare watching with what might have been approval in her dark eyes. Josephine stayed until mid-afternoon, before riding slowly back to the ranch. Samuel was working on the barn roof when she returned, and he climbed down immediately, his face tight with concern. "How did it go?" Josephine dismounted, and Samuel noticed her hands were shaking slightly. "One of the yearlings approached me. Let it get close enough to touch, though I did not touch it." Samuel let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. "That is incredible. Most wild horses would not do that for months, if ever. They are learning I am not a threat." Josephine led Copper toward the barn, suddenly exhausted. "It is a beginning." Samuel followed her, taking Copper's reins when Josephine stumbled slightly. "You are worn out. Let me handle Copper. You should rest. I can take care of my own horse." "I know you can, but you do not have to." Samuel's voice was gentle. "You are allowed to accept help, Josephine." She looked at him, at the concern in his gray eyes, and felt something in her chest tighten. How long had it been since someone had offered to help her without making her feel weak for accepting? How long since someone had looked at her the way Samuel was looking at her now, with respect and something that might have been admiration? "Thank you," she said softly, handing over the reins. That night, Josephine lay in her bed in the ranch house and thought about Samuel Hayes. She thought about the way he worked, the gentleness in his hands when he handled the horses, the quiet competence he brought to every task. She thought about his smile, about the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he was amused. And she thought about the fact that she was a plus-size woman in a world that valued delicate beauty above all else, while he was a man who could probably have his pick of the pretty girls in town. She told herself not to be foolish. He was an employee, nothing more. The warmth she felt when he looked at her was probably just gratitude for having someone around who did not mock her ambitions. But as she drifted off to sleep, she could not quite convince herself that was all it was. The pattern continued for 2 weeks. Each morning, Josephine would ride out to find the herd, and each morning she would sit and wait and simply be present. The horses grew more accustomed to her. Several of the younger ones would approach now, sniffing at her, sometimes even nipping gently at her hat or sleeves. But the lead mare remained distant, watching but never coming close. Samuel watched Josephine's progress with growing respect and something deeper. He found himself thinking about her at odd moments, distracted from his work by the memory of her laugh or the determined set of her shoulders. He told himself it was merely admiration for her skill, but he knew he was lying to himself. One evening, as they worked together to prepare dinner in the ranch house kitchen, Samuel found the courage to speak more personally. "Can I ask you something?" Josephine looked up from the vegetables she was chopping. "Of course. Why did you come west? I mean, I know you wanted to ranch, but why here? Why alone?" Josephine set down her knife, considering how much to share. But there was something about Samuel that invited honesty. "After my father died, my brothers inherited the farm. They made it clear there was no place for me there. They said I should find a husband, settle down, live a proper woman's life." She smiled bitterly. "As if such a life would ever be possible for someone like me. Someone like you." Samuel's voice was sharp. "What is that supposed to mean? Come now, Samuel. You have eyes. I am not exactly what men dream of when they think of a wife. I am too large, too strong, too opinionated. I have been told my entire life that I am too much of everything except the things that matter." Samuel set down the pot he had been holding with more force than necessary. "That is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard." Josephine blinked, startled by his vehemence. "You want to know what I see when I look at you?" Samuel took a step closer. "I see the strongest person I have ever met, and I am not talking about just physical strength. I see someone who came to a strange place alone, who is doing something everyone said was impossible. I see someone who is kind to animals and patient when anyone else would have given up. I see someone who works harder than any 3 men I have known." He paused, his gray eyes intense. "And I see someone who is beautiful in a way that has nothing to do with size and everything to do with spirit." Josephine's throat was tight. "Samuel, I am not saying this to make you uncomfortable. I am saying it because someone needs to tell you that everything you were told was a lie. You are not too much of anything. You are exactly right." The air between them was charged, electric. Josephine wanted to step forward, wanted to close the distance between them, but fear held her back. What if she was misreading this? What if his words were kindness, not attraction, as if reading her thoughts? Samuel took another step forward. He was close enough now that Josephine could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes, could smell the scent of hay and leather and something uniquely him. "I think about you all the time," he said quietly. "I know I am just a hired hand, and maybe I have no right to say this. But I need you to know that when I look at you, what I feel has nothing to do with gratitude or respect, though I feel both of those things. What I feel is something much deeper." "What do you feel?" Josephine whispered. Samuel reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she did not, he cupped her cheek with his calloused hand. "I feel like I have been looking for you my whole life without knowing it. I feel like every hard moment, every disappointment was leading me here, to you, to this moment." Josephine leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed. "I am afraid," she admitted. "Of what? Of believing this is real, of letting myself feel what I want to feel, of being hurt." Samuel's thumb stroked gently across her cheekbone. "I cannot promise you will never be hurt. Life does not work that way. But I can promise that I will never hurt you deliberately. I can promise that what I feel is real and honest and true." Josephine opened her eyes. "I feel it too. God help me. I have tried not to, but I feel it too." Samuel smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Then maybe you should stop trying not to." He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, to say no. But Josephine did not pull away. She closed the final inches between them, and when their lips met, it felt like coming home. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative. But then Josephine sighed against his mouth, and Samuel's arms came around her, pulling her close. She fit against him perfectly, her curves soft against his lean frame. The kiss deepened, and Josephine felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since the day I arrived." Josephine laughed, the sound breathless and happy. "I wish you had. Would have been mighty presumptuous of me. I would have forgiven you." They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms, and Josephine felt something shift in her world. She had spent so long convinced that this kind of happiness was not meant for her. But here was Samuel Hayes, holding her like she was precious, looking at her like she was everything he had ever wanted. Maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong about what was possible. Over the following days, something blossomed between Josephine and Samuel. They were careful to maintain propriety. He still slept in the bunkhouse, and they were never alone in the house after dark. But there was a new sweetness to their interactions, a tenderness in the way Samuel would touch her hand in passing, the way Josephine would smile at him across the dinner table. And through it all, the work with the wild herd continued. Josephine's patience was beginning to pay off. More of the horses would approach her now, and several had even allowed her to touch them briefly. But the lead mare remained aloof, watching from a distance, never coming close. "She is the key," Josephine told Samuel one evening. "If I can earn her trust, the rest of the herd will follow. But she has been the leader for years. She will not give in easily." "Maybe she is like someone else I know," Samuel said with a smile. "Strong and independent and not easily won." Josephine threw a piece of bread at him, which he caught with a laugh. It was in the 4th week after Samuel's arrival that everything changed. Josephine had ridden out at dawn as usual, finding the herd in their customary valley. She dismounted and sat in her usual spot, waiting and watching. The routine was familiar now, comforting in its predictability. But today the lead mare did something different. Instead of watching from the edge of the herd, she began to walk toward Josephine. Her steps were slow, deliberate. She would walk a few paces, then stop, assessing, then continue forward. Josephine's heart was pounding so hard she was certain the mare could hear it. She forced herself to remain calm, to keep her breathing steady. This was the moment she had been working toward for weeks. She could not afford to make a mistake now. The mare came closer. 20 feet, 15, 10. She stopped just out of arm's reach, her dark eyes fixed on Josephine's face. They stared at each other, woman and horse, two strong-willed creatures taking each other's measure. Slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, Josephine extended her hand. She did not reach toward the mare, simply held it out, palm up, offering. The mare's nostrils flared. She took one step closer, stretching her neck out. Her nose was inches from Josephine's palm now. Josephine could feel the mare's breath, warm and smelling of grass. Then, so gently it was almost tentative, the mare pressed her nose into Josephine's palm. Tears streamed down Josephine's face, but she did not move. She let the mare explore, let her sniff and investigate. After a long moment, the mare lifted her head slightly, and Josephine took a chance. She raised her other hand slowly and rested it on the mare's neck. The mare's skin twitched beneath her touch, but she did not pull away. Josephine stroked gently, feeling the strength in the muscles beneath the sleek black coat. "You are magnificent," she whispered. "Strong and brave and free. I am not here to break you. I am here to be your partner if you will have me." The mare stood for several more minutes, allowing Josephine's touch, before finally stepping back. She tossed her head, wheeled around, and returned to her herd. But before she led them away, she turned back to look at Josephine one more time, and Josephine could have sworn she saw understanding in those dark eyes. When Josephine returned to the ranch, Samuel took one look at her face and knew something momentous had happened. The lead mare. Josephine nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. Samuel whooped, picked her up, and spun her around. Josephine laughed, holding onto his shoulders, and when he set her down, she kissed him right there in the middle of the yard in broad daylight. "You did it," Samuel said when they finally broke apart. "You incredible woman, you actually did it." "We did it," Josephine corrected. "I could not have come this far without you." Samuel's expression softened. "Josephine, I need to tell you something. I am falling in love with you." "No, that is not right. I have already fallen. I am in love with you completely and utterly." Josephine's breath caught. "Samuel, I know it has only been a few weeks. I know this is fast, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You are everything I never knew I needed. You are strong and brave and determined, and when you smile, it feels like the sun coming out. I want to build a life with you, here on this ranch. I want to gentle horses with you and watch the sunset with you and wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life." Josephine was crying openly now. "I love you too. I tried not to. I told myself I was being foolish, but I cannot help it. I love you, Samuel Hayes." Samuel pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "Marry me. I know I do not have much to offer, but I can promise you my heart and my hands and every day of my future." "Yes," Josephine said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony in Carson City. The minister was a kind man who did not blink at Josephine's sighs, or the fact that she wore her best dress, which was still work-worn and practical. Samuel wore a new shirt that Josephine had sewn for him, and when he looked at her, his eyes held such love that several of the townspeople who had gathered to watch were moved to tears. Josephine had expected some of the women in town to make snide comments about how she had trapped herself a husband, but instead, many of them approached her after the ceremony with surprising warmth. "I heard what you did with those wild horses," one woman said, a rancher's wife named Martha. "My husband said it was impossible, said no woman could break that herd. But you did it, did you not?" "I did not break them," Josephine corrected gently. "I earned their trust. There is a difference." Martha smiled. "I like you. You are going to do just fine here." The reception was held at the ranch, a simple affair with food that Josephine and Samuel had prepared together. About 20 people came, more than Josephine had expected. Apparently, word of her success with the wild herd had spread, and curiosity had overcome prejudice for many of the locals. As the sun set and the guests began to leave, Samuel took Josephine's hand and led her out to the corral. The wild herd had come down from the hills, drawn by habit to the water and hay that was now regularly provided. The black lead mare stood at the fence, watching them with her intelligent eyes. "I think she is giving us her blessing," Samuel said softly. Josephine leaned against him, content. "I think you are right." That night, as man and wife, they shared the ranch house that was now truly their home. Samuel was gentle and reverent, treating Josephine like the precious thing she was. He kissed every inch of her skin, whispering how beautiful she was, how perfect. And Josephine, who had spent so much of her life feeling too large, too much, felt perfectly sized for the first time in her life. She fit in Samuel's arms exactly as she was meant to, and his love wrapped around her like a warm blanket. In the morning, they woke tangled together, and Samuel kissed her forehead. "Good morning, Mrs. Hayes," Josephine smiled. "I like the sound of that. So do I. But I am going to keep calling you Josephine most of the time." "Why?" "Because it is a beautiful name and it suits you, strong and classic and lovely." Josephine laughed. "You are going to spoil me with all this romance." "That is the plan." The work of the ranch continued, but now there was a new rhythm to it, the rhythm of partnership. Samuel and Josephine worked as a team, each complementing the other's strengths. Together, they continued the slow, patient work of gentling the wild herd. It took another month before the black lead mare allowed Josephine to put a halter on her. It took another week after that before she accepted a saddle. But through it all, Josephine was patient, never pushing, always giving the mare the choice to participate or step back. The day Josephine finally rode the lead mare was one of the happiest of her life. Samuel stood at the corral fence, watching with pride as his wife sat tall on the back of the horse that everyone said could never be broken. But the mare was not broken. She was still proud, still spirited, still wild at heart. She had simply chosen to trust. "What are you going to name her?" Samuel called. Josephine stroked the mare's neck. "Freedom. Because that is what she represents, the freedom to be exactly who you are, wild, heart and all." News of Josephine's success spread throughout Carson City and beyond. Men who had laughed at her ambitions now came to her with grudging respect, asking if she might help them with difficult horses. Josephine took on a few cases, always with Samuel by her side, and together they built a reputation as the best horse gentlers in Nevada. But it was not all work and success. There were hard times too. That first winter was brutal, with storms that seemed to last for days. The wild herd struggled to find food, and Josephine and Samuel spent hours each day hauling hay out to the valley, making sure the horses had enough to survive. During one particularly vicious storm, 3 of the younger horses got separated from the herd. Josephine and Samuel rode out in the freezing wind to search for them, risking their own safety. They found the yearlings huddled in a ravine, terrified and cold. It took hours to coax them out and lead them back to the ranch, and by the time they returned, both Josephine and Samuel were half frozen. They huddled together by the fire that night, wrapped in blankets, sipping hot coffee. "That was foolish," Samuel said, his teeth still chattering. "We could have died out there, but we did not, and neither did those horses." Josephine set down her cup and took Samuel's hands, rubbing warmth back into them. "We made a promise to this herd when we took on this ranch. We promised to care for them. That means in good times and bad." Samuel looked at her with such love that it took her breath away. "How did I get so lucky to find you? I ask myself the same thing every day." Spring came, bringing with it new life. Several of the mares gave birth, and Josephine delighted in watching the foals take their first wobbly steps. She spent hours each day with them, getting them accustomed to human touch and presence from the very beginning. These foals would grow up knowing that humans could be trusted, and they would be easier to work with as a result. Samuel watched her with the foals and felt his heart expand. He had known he loved her, but seeing her with the baby horses, seeing the gentleness and care she showed them, made him fall in love with her all over again. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Samuel brought up something they had been dancing around for months. "I have been thinking about the future." Josephine looked at him. "What about it? About our future? About family?" He took her hand. "How would you feel about having children?" Josephine's breath caught. She had wanted children for as long as she could remember, but she had long ago convinced herself it was not going to happen. "I would love that. But Samuel, I am 35 now. That is getting old for a first pregnancy." "You are 24, Samuel corrected with a smile. "And plenty of women have healthy babies at that age. You really want this? Children, I mean, because it would change everything." Samuel turned to face her fully. "Josephine, I want everything with you. I want children who have your strength and determination. I want to teach them to ride and rope. I want to watch you be a mother the same way you are a wife and a rancher with your whole heart. So yes, I really want this." Tears pricked at Josephine's eyes. "Then yes, let us try for a family." It took 3 months before Josephine missed her monthly bleeding. She waited another week before saying anything to Samuel, afraid to get his hopes up. But when the symptoms continued, She finally told him one morning over breakfast, "I think I might be with child." Samuel's fork clattered to his plate. "You think? Are you sure? How do you know?" Josephine laughed at his excitement. "I am not completely sure yet, but all the signs are there. We should probably have Doc Martin come out and confirm it." Samuel was on his feet in an instant, pulling her into his arms. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. Maybe. We do not know for certain yet. I know. I can feel it." He placed his hand on her stomach, even though there was no swell yet. "This is the best news I have ever received." Doc Martin confirmed the pregnancy 2 days later. Josephine was indeed expecting, and if all went well, she would give birth in late winter, probably February of 1879. The doctor warned her that pregnancy was always risky, but he saw no immediate concerns. He advised her to rest more and not overwork herself. Samuel took the advice to heart, perhaps a bit too much. He fussed over Josephine constantly, trying to do all the heavy work himself, insisting she rest at every opportunity. Finally, after a week of this, Josephine put her foot down. "Samuel Hayes, I love you dearly, but if you do not let me do some work, I am going to lose my mind. I am pregnant, not fragile. I am still perfectly capable of feeding horses and mending fences." Samuel looked chastened. "I am sorry, I just worry. I want to keep you and the baby safe." Josephine softened, taking his hand. "I know, and I love you for it. But the best way to keep us both healthy is to let me keep doing what I have always done, just maybe with a bit more caution. I promise I will not do anything dangerous." "You promise?" "I promise." They found a balance over the following months. Josephine continued to work with the horses, though she was more careful now, avoiding the ones that were still skittish or unpredictable. Samuel took on the heavier tasks without making a fuss about it. And together they prepared for the arrival of their child. Josephine's pregnancy progressed well. Her body, so strong from years of physical work, handled the changes with relative ease. She did tire more easily, and her belly grew round and prominent, but she was healthy and happy. The women in town, who had been standoffish at first, began to warm to her more fully. Several came to visit, bringing gifts for the baby and offering advice. Martha, the rancher's wife who had been kind at the wedding, became a particular friend. "You know, when you first arrived, I will admit I was one of the ones who laughed," Martha confessed one afternoon as they sat on the porch, shelling peas. "Not to your face, mind you, but I laughed. I thought you were crazy for thinking you could handle those wild horses." "And now?" Josephine asked. "Now I think you are the bravest woman I have ever met. You came here with nothing but a dream, and you made it real. You did something everyone said was impossible, and you did it your way, with patience and kindness instead of force." Martha smiled. "You have taught a lot of people in this town, myself included, not to judge by appearances." Josephine felt warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you. That means more than you know." As winter approached, Josephine grew larger and moved more slowly. But she was still determined to be involved in the daily running of the ranch. She could no longer ride, which frustrated her, but she could still work with the horses from the ground, still oversee their care. The wild herd had grown calmer over the months. Many of them now came readily to the corral, no longer afraid. Freedom, the black lead mare, had become Josephine's particular companion. The mare would often follow her around the ranch, a loyal shadow. Samuel teased her about it. "I think that horse loves you more than I do." "Impossible," Josephine replied. "Though she does come when I call, which is more than I can say for my husband sometimes." Samuel laughed and pulled her into his arms, careful of her swollen belly. "I always come when you call. It is just that sometimes I am busy and have not heard you yet." Excuses, excuses. Life was good. Better than Josephine had ever dared to dream. She had a home, a ranch, horses that trusted her, a husband who loved her, and a baby on the way. Sometimes she would lie awake at night, Samuel's arm around her, his hand resting on her belly where their child grew, and she would marvel at how much her life had changed. 2 years ago, she had been alone in Missouri, mourning her father and facing an uncertain future. Now she was Josephine Hayes, rancher, wife, and soon-to-be mother. She had proven to everyone, including herself, that she was capable of anything she set her mind to. The baby came on a cold February night in 1879. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours. Doc Martin was there, and Martha came to help. Samuel paced outside the bedroom, nearly wearing a hole in the floor with his worry. But when he finally heard the sharp cry of an infant, he rushed into the room to find Josephine exhausted but smiling, cradling a tiny bundle in her arms. "It is a boy," she said, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. "Samuel, we have a son." Samuel approached the bed with something like awe on his face. He looked down at the tiny red face of his son, at the small fists waving in the air, and felt his throat tighten with emotion. "He is perfect." "You are perfect." He kissed Josephine's forehead, then gently touched one finger to the baby's cheek. "What should we name him?" Josephine had been thinking about this for months. "James, James Thomas Hayes. James after my father, Thomas after yours." "James," Samuel repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Hello, James. Welcome to the world, son." The first few months with a newborn were exhausting. James was a healthy baby, but he woke frequently at night, and Josephine was often bone-tired. But Samuel was an involved father, getting up with her for night feedings, changing diapers, walking the floor with James when he was fussy. "You are good at this," Josephine told him one night as he rocked James back to sleep. "So are you. I feel like I am fumbling through it half the time." Samuel looked at her seriously. "Every new parent feels that way. But look at him, Josephine. He is thriving. He is happy and healthy and loved. We are doing just fine." As James grew, he showed signs of inheriting both his parents' best qualities. He was strong like his mother, with her dark curls and determined spirit. But he had his father's gray eyes and easy smile. And he loved the horses with a passion that delighted both Josephine and Samuel. By the time James was 2 years old, he could sit on a horse with help, and he would clap his hands with glee whenever they went to visit the herd. Freedom, the black mare, was surprisingly gentle with the toddler, allowing him to pat her nose with his chubby hands. "She knows he is ours," Josephine said, watching the interaction with a smile. "She is protecting him the same way she protects the foals." The ranch continued to prosper. Word of Josephine and Samuel's success had spread far beyond Carson City, and they now had more business than they could handle. People would travel for days to bring difficult horses to them, knowing that if anyone could gentle them, it was the Hayes couple. They expanded the ranch, buying additional land and building new corrals. They hired 2 young men to help with the work, teaching them Josephine's patient methods. The wild herd, once a source of trouble and frustration for the previous owner, was now the foundation of a thriving business. But more than the success, more than the money or the reputation, what mattered most to Josephine was the family she had built. Every morning she would wake next to Samuel, would hear James playing in the next room, would look out at the land she owned, and feel a profound sense of gratitude. One evening, when James was 3 years old, the family sat together on the porch, watching the sunset. James was nestled between his parents, chattering about his day and the horses he had seen. Samuel looked at Josephine over their son's head, and she saw in his eyes the same love that had been there from the beginning, perhaps even deeper now, seasoned by shared challenges and joys. "You ever think about that first day I rode onto this property?" Samuel asked. Josephine smiled. "All the time. I was so nervous. I had heard about the crazy woman who bought the Fletcher place, and I did not know what to expect." "And what did you find?" Samuel's voice was soft. "I found everything I had been looking for without knowing I was searching. I found a partner, a love, a home. I found you." Josephine felt tears prick her eyes. Even after all this time, Samuel could still make her cry with his words. "I was so convinced I would spend my life alone. I thought no one could ever love me the way I was. I love you exactly the way you are. I always have. From the first moment I saw you driving that fence post into the ground, all determination and strength." He reached over James to take her hand. "You are the most remarkable person I have ever known." James, sensing the emotion between his parents, snuggled closer to his mother. "I love you, Mama." Josephine kissed the top of his head. "I love you too, sweetheart." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. In the distance, they could see the herd grazing peacefully, Freedom standing watch over them as she always did. "I have been thinking," Samuel said. "Maybe it is time for James to have a little brother or sister." Josephine laughed. "You want another baby?" "I want as many babies as you are willing to have. I love being a father, and you are an incredible mother. Why would we not want more?" Josephine considered. She was 27 now, still young enough, and the idea of another child, of expanding their family further, was appealing. "Let us see what happens. If it is meant to be, it will be." It was meant to be. A year later, Josephine gave birth to twin girls, much to everyone's surprise. They named them Sarah and Emma, and if having one baby had been exhausting, having two was overwhelming. But Samuel was there every step of the way, and with help from Martha and some of the other women in town, they managed. James was delighted with his sisters. Though at 4 years old, he was occasionally frustrated that they could not yet play with him properly. But he would sit by their cradles and talk to them, telling them about the horses and the ranch and all the things they would do when they were bigger. The years passed, each one bringing new joys and challenges. The ranch continued to thrive, becoming one of the most successful in Nevada. Josephine and Samuel's reputation grew, and they were consulted on horse matters from as far away as California and Colorado. But they never forgot where they had started, never forgot the wild herd that had brought them together. Freedom lived to be nearly 20 years old, ancient for a wild horse. When she finally passed, peacefully in her sleep, Josephine mourned her like a dear friend. "She gave me so much," Josephine told Samuel as they buried the mare on a hillside overlooking the ranch. "She taught me that trust has to be earned, that patience is the greatest virtue, that true partnership comes from mutual respect, not dominance. She brought us together," Samuel said. "If you had not been trying to gentle that herd, I never would have stopped here. She gave us each other." They stood together, hands clasped, and looked out over the land they had built their life on. James was 12 now, already tall and strong, working alongside his father. The twins were 8 fearless girls who rode like they had been born in the saddle. "We should have another baby," Josephine said suddenly. Samuel looked at her in surprise. "Really, you want another?" "I do, one more, to complete our family." Samuel pulled her close, kissing her temple. "Then let us have one more." Their last child, a boy they named Daniel, was born when Josephine was 32. He was a surprise baby, coming 6 years after the twins, but he was no less loved for the gap. If anything, his older siblings doted on him, and James especially took pride in being a big brother. As Josephine held Daniel for the first time, surrounded by Samuel and their other children, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. She thought about that dusty day when she first arrived in Carson City, about the laughter of the men who said no woman could break that wild herd. She had not broken them. She had done something far more valuable. She had earned their trust, had built a partnership based on respect and patience. And in doing so, she had built a life beyond her wildest dreams. "What are you thinking about?" Samuel asked, settling onto the bed beside her. "About how they said it could not be done, that no woman could break that wild herd," Samuel smiled. "You proved them wrong." "No," Josephine said, looking at her family gathered around her, at the life they had built together. "I proved that breaking was never the answer. The answer was always love, patience, and respect, for horses and for people." Samuel leaned in and kissed her softly. "I love you, Josephine Hayes. I love you too." Years continued to pass, and the Hayes family became a cornerstone of the Carson City community. Their ranch was known throughout Nevada and beyond. But more than that, they were known for their kindness, their integrity, and the way they treated everyone with respect, regardless of background or circumstances. Josephine never forgot what it felt like to be dismissed and underestimated. She made it a point to encourage other women who wanted to break free from traditional roles, who wanted to ranch or run businesses or simply live life on their own terms. She became a mentor to several young women, teaching them not just about horses, but about believing in themselves. Samuel remained her steadfast partner through it all. Their love, which had started so quickly and burned so bright, never dimmed. If anything, it grew deeper and richer with each passing year. They had weathered storms together, both literal and figurative. They had faced financial hardships, difficult winters, sick children, and the thousand small crises that make up a life. But through it all, they had each other. And that made all the difference. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Samuel planned a surprise. He arranged for the children to stay with Martha for the evening, then led Josephine out to the eastern ridge where she had first approached the wild herd all those years ago. The sun was setting, painting the sky in the familiar shades of orange and purple that Josephine had come to love. Samuel had set up a picnic, complete with her favorite foods and a bottle of wine they had been saving for a special occasion. "What is all this?" Josephine asked, delighted. "I wanted to remind you where we started, right here on this ridge. You were so determined, so brave. You did not care that everyone said it was impossible. You just knew you had to try." Samuel took her hands. "You changed my life, Josephine. Before I met you, I was drifting, lost. I thought I knew what I wanted, but I did not. Not really. Then I saw you, and suddenly everything made sense." Josephine felt the familiar sting of tears. "You changed my life too. I thought I was going to spend my life alone, proving myself to people who would never believe in me anyway. Then you showed up and you believed in me from the start. You saw me, really saw me in a way no one ever had before." Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a ring, a simple band with a small diamond. "I could not afford a proper ring when we got married, but I have been saving and I wanted to give you this. It is not much, but it is a symbol of everything we have built together." Josephine took the ring with shaking hands. It was beautiful, but more than that, it represented 20 years of love and partnership and shared dreams. "Samuel, it is perfect." He slipped it onto her finger, next to the plain band she had worn since their wedding day. "I love you, Josephine. Just as much today as I did 20 years ago. More, even. I love you too. So much." They sat together on the ridge, watching the sunset and reminiscing about their years together. They talked about the early days, about their children, about the horses they had gentled and the lives they had touched. They talked about the future, about watching their children grow and maybe one day meeting grandchildren. "You have any regrets?" Samuel asked. Josephine thought about it seriously. No, not a single one. Everything that happened, even the hard parts, led me here. To you, to our family, to this life. How could I regret any of that, even the people who laughed at you when you first arrived? Josephine smiled. Especially them. Because proving them wrong was so satisfying. Samuel laughed and pulled her close. They stayed on the ridge until the stars came out, wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for every moment they had been given. The children grew. James became a skilled horse trainer in his own right, eventually taking over much of the day-to-day operation of the ranch. He married a woman named Alice, a school teacher from town who was as smart as she was kind. They gave Josephine and Samuel their first grandchild, a little girl named Josephine after her grandmother. The twins, Sarah and Emma, both found their own paths. Sarah married a rancher from a neighboring property, continuing the family tradition. Emma, always the more adventurous of the two, moved to San Francisco to study medicine, becoming one of the first female doctors in California. She would come home to visit often, bringing stories of the wider world that fascinated her younger siblings. Daniel, the baby of the family, showed an early aptitude for business. As he grew older, he helped expand the ranch's operations, establishing partnerships with buyers throughout the West. Under his management, the Hayes Ranch became even more successful. But through all the changes, through children growing and leaving and returning, through the modernization that slowly crept across the West, some things remained constant. Josephine and Samuel's love for each other never wavered. The ranch remained a place of respect and kindness, where horses were treated as partners rather than property. And the wild herd, or rather the descendants of that original wild herd, continued to run free on the Hayes property, a living reminder of where it all began. As Josephine and Samuel grew older, they began to slow down. They left more of the physical work to their children and the hands they employed. But they never stopped being involved, never stopped caring about every horse on their property. On a warm spring evening in 1907, 30 years after Josephine had first arrived in Carson City, she and Samuel sat on their porch, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. There were 7 of them now, ranging in age from 15 to 3, and their laughter filled the air like music. "Can you believe it has been 30 years?" Josephine asked, her hand finding Samuel's as naturally as breathing. Samuel squeezed her fingers gently. "Some days it feels like yesterday. Other days I cannot remember a time before you. Do you remember what you said to me in the kitchen that first month? When you told me I was not too much of anything, that I was exactly right? Of course I remember. It was one of the most important things I ever said." Josephine turned to look at him. His hair was gray now, and there were lines around his eyes and mouth. But to her, he was as handsome as the day they met. "Those words changed my life. They made me believe that maybe, just maybe, I deserved to be loved exactly as I was. You deserved it then, and you deserve it now." "You have always deserved it." Samuel brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You are the love of my life, Josephine Hayes. My partner, my best friend, the mother of my children. You are everything." Tears streamed down Josephine's face, but they were happy tears. She leaned her head on Samuel's shoulder and watched their family, this beautiful family they had created together. One of their grandchildren, James and Alice's youngest son, ran up to the porch, breathless with excitement. "Grandma, Grandpa, there is a new foal in the east pasture." "Can we go see it?" Josephine smiled. "Of course, sweetheart. Lead the way." The whole family trooped out to the pasture, children running ahead, adults following at a more sedate pace. And there, standing on wobbly legs, was a black foal with a perfect white star on her forehead, the image of her ancestor Freedom. "She is beautiful," Alice breathed. Josephine approached slowly, not wanting to spook the mother. But the mare, one of Freedom's great-great-granddaughters, stood calmly, allowing Josephine to come close. The foal looked up at her with curious dark eyes, so reminiscent of that first lead mare all those years ago. "Hello, little one," Josephine said softly. "You are going to be something special, I can tell." Samuel came to stand beside her, his arm around her waist. "What should we name her?" Josephine thought for a moment, then smiled. "Hope, because that is what she represents. Hope for the future, for new beginnings, for all the wonderful things still to come." "Hope," Samuel repeated. "I like it." They stood together, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, watching the new foal take her first steps. And Josephine thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. She thought about being told that no woman could break that wild herd, and how she had proven that breaking was never necessary. She thought about Samuel riding onto her property and changing her life forever. She thought about the children they had raised and the legacy they were leaving. Most of all, she thought about love. The love between her and Samuel, which had been the foundation of everything. The love they had for their children and grandchildren. The love they had for the horses and the land and the life they had built. It had not always been easy. There had been hard times, moments of doubt, struggles and challenges. But they had faced everything together, and that had made all the difference. As the sun set on that spring evening, painting the Nevada sky in shades of gold and pink, Josephine Hayes stood surrounded by love and looked at her life with complete satisfaction. She had taken a chance all those years ago, had dared to dream of something better. And that dream had given her more than she ever could have imagined. "I am happy," she said to Samuel, simple and true. He pulled her closer, kissing her temple. "So am I, so very, very happy." And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, as their family laughed and talked around them, as the new foal took a few more tentative steps on her long legs, Josephine knew that this was what mattered. Not the opinions of those who had doubted her, not the challenges they had overcome, but this, right here, right now. Family, love, and a life built on patience, respect, and trust. They said no woman could break that wild herd. But Josephine Ashford Hayes had never been interested in breaking anything. She had been interested in building trust, building partnerships, building a family and a legacy that would last for generations. And as she stood there in the twilight, her husband's arm around her, her family surrounding her, and a new foal representing hope for the future, she knew that she had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. The story of Josephine and Samuel Hayes would be told for generations in Carson City. They would be remembered not just for their success with horses, but for the love they shared and the kindness they showed to everyone they met. Their ranch would remain in the family for over a century, a testament to what two people could build when they worked together with love and respect. But on that spring evening in 1907, none of that mattered quite as much as the simple joy of being together. Samuel and Josephine walked back to the house hand in hand, their family following behind them. And as they crossed the threshold into the home they had built together, Josephine felt nothing but profound gratitude for every moment, every challenge, every joy that had led her to this perfect life. She had come to Nevada 30 years ago with nothing but determination and a dream. She had been told she could not succeed, that no woman could break that wild herd, but she had never tried to break anything. Instead, she had built something beautiful, a partnership with wild horses, a marriage with a man who saw her true worth, and a family that would carry their legacy forward. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. Not proving the doubters wrong, though she had done that, but proving to herself that she was worthy of love, worthy of happiness, worthy of the beautiful life she had created. As night fell over the Hayes Ranch in Carson City, Nevada, and the family gathered for dinner in the house filled with laughter and love, Josephine looked around the table at the faces of everyone she held dear. Samuel caught her eye and smiled, that same smile that had captured her heart 3 decades ago, and she smiled back. This was her life. This was her legacy. And it was more than she ever could have dreamed. The wild horses still ran on the ridge, free and proud, just as they always had. But now they ran in partnership with the Hayes family, in a relationship built on mutual respect and trust. And that, Josephine thought as she reached for Samuel's hand under the table, was exactly as it should be. Years later, when both Josephine and Samuel had passed peacefully in their sleep, the family would gather to celebrate their lives. They would tell stories of the early days, of how Josephine had gentled the wild herd that everyone said could not be broken. They would talk about Samuel's unwavering support and love. They would remember the laughter, the challenges overcome, the love that had been the foundation of everything. But in that moment, in 1907, with their whole family around them and the future stretching bright and promising ahead, Josephine and Samuel simply held hands and enjoyed the blessing of another ordinary, perfect evening together. The legacy they built together would endure for generations, inspiring others to believe in themselves, to approach challenges with patience and kindness, and to never let others define what they could or could not do. But more than that, they had built a love story that proved that true partnership, mutual respect, and genuine affection could overcome any obstacle. They had proven that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in breaking things to your will, but in the patience to earn trust and build something lasting. And they had shown that love, when it is real and true and based on seeing and valuing each other completely, can create a foundation strong enough to build a lifetime of happiness upon. As the evening wore on and the grandchildren were tucked into bed, Samuel and Josephine stood together one last time on their porch, looking out over the land they had loved and nurtured for 30 years. "No regrets?" Samuel asked, as he had asked many times before. "Not a single one," Josephine replied, as she always did. "This life with you, this family we have created, this legacy we are leaving it is everything I ever wanted and more than I ever dreamed possible." Samuel wrapped his arms around her from behind, and they stood there in the darkness, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and had built something beautiful together. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "I love you too," she replied, "always and forever." And under the vast Nevada sky, with stars shining bright above and the sound of horses moving peacefully in the distance, Josephine and Samuel Hayes held each other close and knew that they were exactly where they were meant to be, living the life they were meant to live together. The end.